Alrighty, we're approaching the point in which RFK may start to look like a more serious presidential candidate than Ron Desantis. I think that might surprise a lot of people. And, of course, polls mean almost nothing at this point. If you even consider polls to be accurate, we are still like a year away from, well, I shouldn't say that. When's Iowa caucuses for the Republicans? It's February, right? But we've got more than 6 months, certainly. We've got the whole rest of this year. We've got, we've got the winter coming. DeSantis hasn't even announced, although I think everybody knows that he's running. The latest we've heard, I saw Charles Gasparino saying that he's being told Memorial Day will be when DeSantis is likely to announce. And Bobby Kennedy Jr. has been out for a few weeks now. He's making the rounds. Seems to be universally liked amongst all independent-minded people. He's getting respect from the left, from the right. He's not getting respect from the corporate media in the least. But that reminds me of somebody else I know, somebody who came out of nowhere and who looked like a joke candidate, but who ended up becoming the President of the United States less than 8 years ago. And I'm sure you all know that man's name was Donald J. Trump, Cheeto Jesus himself. And I remember not too long ago, I think it was maybe January, February of this year, RFK Jr. Was on the Jimmy Dore show, and he was talking about the possibility of running for president. And Jimmy was telling him, oh, it'll never work. It's a waste of time. The political system is broken. They'll kill you. You'll never get anywhere. Doesn't matter. You're wasting your time. And RFK said, hey, I could be the Trump of the Democratic Party. Look at what Trump did in the Republican Party. He went in, he swept out their establishment. Now, Trump didn't do a very good job of managing that, and they managed, and he let a lot of them back in. RFK is much more politically savvy, I think, than Trump as far as how the political institutions work. He's much less naive than Trump. And so I think if RFK actually did have that kind of power, he wouldn't have squandered it in the same way that Trump did. Now, Trump has, I think, learned a lot from his 4 years in office. I think that his first term, all in all, was a failure, even though he was the best president of my lifetime. But he was hampered by himself and by the people around him. And I do think that if Trump were to be given power again, he would do a much better job, because he knows, I think he's learned from a lot of his mistakes. But with that said, RFK Jr. has something even more powerful that he learned from, and that is the assassination of both his father and his uncle at the hands of the CIA, of the very deep state that people have become so conscious of in the wake of the Trump presidency. And so I think that there's almost nobody, poetically, who would be better to take on and to dismantle the deep state than a Kennedy, particularly the oldest Kennedy around today, I think. One of the only ones who remembers the Kennedy administration. And so increasingly, I do think that RFK Jr. would have a lot of strength as a general election candidate. But we're not in a general election yet. We are in a primary season, and it is still an uphill battle for him to win a Democratic primary. But in contrast to DeSantis, the more that DeSantis is in the spotlight, I think that the worse he performs under pressure. I don't think that he's a great speaker. I never have. I've seen DeSantis in person. I've talked to him. I don't think that he's a compelling individual. That's just not who he is. I think he's done great things as governor, much better than I ever expected. I didn't expect him to be the best governor in America, but, here we are. And I can't take that away from him. But when it comes to campaigning for president, it's all about the pitch. And I don't think he's the pitch master. I think he's easily rattled, and at this point, Trump, I think, would benefit from even though Trump doesn't need to go to a debate, he doesn't need to have debates because he is, in the lead. I do think it would actually benefit him to have a debate with DeSantis, perhaps moderated by Tucker Carlson, because I think that Trump would not only trounce DeSantis, he would crush him into the dirt and turn him into a laughingstock who could never run for president again or hold any elected office, much in the fashion that he beclowned first Rand Paul, then Marco Rubio, and finally Ted Cruz. Those three men at one point were considered to be, a part of the Republican Party's deep bench of, potential presidential candidates. And today, all three of them are regarded with varying levels of disgust and derision. Not because they themselves necessarily changed, but because people's perception of them changed after they had close encounters with one Donald J. Trump. Today, people largely regard Marco Rubio as a diminutive little man. They regard Rand Paul as ugly. And they regard Ted Cruz as a power-hungry politician right out of Central Casting. A dishonest hack who will put his hand on the Bible and swear to tell the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And then he'll take his hand off the Bible and he'll lie through his teeth. Even Ted Cruz's staunchest supporters, people who worked on his very campaign, who I still listen to, that have podcasts and things, even they don't like Ted Cruz anymore. That's how much Donald Trump destroyed him and crushed him into the dirt. People wonder, every few years, oh my gosh, is Ted Cruz going to be able to win re-election? Not because Texas is turning blue. That's what people thought at first. Texas isn't turning blue, at least not to the extent that, at least not to the extent that it would risk, a generic Republican being able to win a statewide office. No, it's because Ted Cruz is just is uniquely unpopular. He's less popular than John Cornyn, because as much as I detest John Cornyn, most people just look at John Cornyn and they see nothing. They look at Ted Cruz because of his encounters with Trump, because Trump highlighted him in particular. They see a bad person. They look at John Cornyn, they see nothing. They just see, oh, he's a generic Republican. I don't know anything about him. In reality, John Cornyn is much worse than Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz is still probably one of the better people in the Senate. Now, the Senate is a den of snakes. Most of them are terrible. But I don't think that Ted Cruz is, particularly bad when you compare him to other senators. You compare him to Roy Blunt or Tom Tillis or, Rick Scott. And so I think that this is what's going to happen to DeSantis. I think that 3 years from now, no one will remember who Ron DeSantis ever was, to the extent that they even know who he is now. Most of the country still doesn't know anything about Ron DeSantis. They haven't formed an opinion on him. Sure, there's a small group of people who are think of him very highly because of what happened, during the so-called pandemic. That's what the mainstream likes to call it. Some of us like to call it something else that you're not allowed to say on YouTube. And Trump supporters, like to take that away from him and say, actually, DeSantis was really, he actually supported lockdowns. And it was Trump who didn't, I don't play that game. I mean, that's nonsensical. I think that the Trump people, because it's, it's like a loyalty test for them. They have to they have to always, hold the position. Trump has never done anything wrong. His shit don't stink, and everybody who is a potential rival to Trump, they are the worst person on the planet. They've never done anything right. They deserve no credit for anything. I don't play that game. I'm not in a cult. But I can recognize the reality that old Ronnie D is in for a rude awakening. Now, RFK Jr., on the other hand, I think that if he's ever able to get into the same room as Joe Biden, which I don't think will ever happen. Joe Biden will never set foot in the same room with RFK Jr. I think that he would shred Biden. RFK Jr. is a smart guy. He never done drugs, doesn't drink, to my extent, to my understanding. He's very clear-headed. He's not demented. He's totally sharp, and most importantly, he's right. He is an activist first and foremost. He's never held political office. What he has been for his whole life is a professional activist, specifically for left-wing causes, a lot of which, I've never taken any interest in. But at this point in time, the populist left and right are united on more than they're divided. There is more common ground than there is. What's the opposite of common ground? Disputed territory? And old RFK recognizes that. He embraces it, which is a very interesting strategy in a primary. Usually that doesn't work out well. Normally in a primary you want to appeal to your base, and what he's doing, under other circumstances would be called triangulation. I'm putting that in scare quotes, that you do in a general election. Now, I don't think that triangulation is actually a good strategy. And I wouldn't call this triangulation. I think that he's taking a principled stand that people on either side of our, modern political aisle, principled people on either side, could agree with him on. But unfortunately, I do think that there is more of an audience for his message on the right, but he is definitely not a right-wing guy. He could not run in a Republican primary. He's not a Republican. I mean, there's a lot of Republicans who just, based on the name Kennedy, would never vote for the guy. But there's also a lot of old Republicans who were once Democrats, and may even be old enough to have voted for Jack Kennedy back in the day. But even if they didn't, they might have strong, positive feelings for the 60s Kennedy family, not Ted Kennedy. You kind of have to separate RFK and JFK from Teddy Kennedy, who is pretty irredeemable in my book. I can't think of anything positive to say about the man, even if you excuse the death of his young paramour. But getting back to the polls, even though nationally you see RFK versus Biden and DeSantis versus Trump looking very similar so far, both RFK and DeSantis are polling around the 20s for the most part from what I've seen. Primaries are not national elections. They are state-by-state elections. And the national environment can change as a result of each state contest because they happen sequentially. They don't happen on the same day. So for the Democrats, the first primary round is going to be South Carolina. So I would like to see some numbers for Bobby Kennedy out of South Carolina, particularly after he's had time to campaign there, which I haven't really seen. I haven't seen him campaigning in South Carolina. I don't know, it might be part of a strategy just to completely bet all his hopes on New Hampshire, which historically some people have, because it tends to be cheaper to campaign in New Hampshire than, well, historically Iowa was the one that came before it. Now it's South Carolina on the Democrat side, because I think the South Carolina Democrats are much more controllable. If it was Iowa, I think that Biden would be at a bigger risk, but considering that I'm pretty sure South Carolina Democrats are majority black, they don't tend to be the most tribally liberal in the same sense that you normally think. The people who are going to be passionately for Biden over RFK are people like Politics Girl, paid shills who are, suburban wine moms, professional women who never see their children and pay for daycare and have, cuck husbands. The same people who think that Trump is a fascist. Now, I do realize it was over, 50 years ago? Yeah, 55 years ago. But when RFK Sr. ran in 68, he did very well amongst black voters. And just generally speaking, I mean, especially in the South, black Democrats are not really culturally in tune with affluent white liberals. And yes, I mean, they reliably vote Democratic. It's not like they're ever going to vote Republican. Within a Democratic primary, I think that if they're given the choice of someone who harkens back to an older, nostalgic era of the Democratic Party, I think that that would appeal to a lot of them. I think that RFK's distrust of authority would appeal to them. I don't think running on a campaign in which you openly state JFK was killed by the CIA, I think that that is going to resonate much better amongst black voters that within the Democratic primary than your average affluent white liberal. Black Democrats tend to be lower income and therefore much more open to dangerous conspiracy theories that the CIA doesn't want you to believe. So I think if he goes down there to South Carolina and really gives it a shot, I think that he could poll pretty well. By contrast, even though New Hampshire is basically home turf for him, the kinds of New England white liberals who may have voted for JFK and RFK 55 years ago are dead today. And the liberals that live there now, I don't think, are at all receptive to the idea that any authority figures are really bad. That's just not. It just not really doesn't seem to line up with their culture. I mean, look at their longtime Republican governor, Charlie Baker. Someone who questions authority does not vote for Charlie Baker. Someone who votes for Charlie Baker loves authority and wants to prostrate their loyalty, or prostrate themselves in order to demonstrate their loyalty. But I believe New Hampshire is an open primary state, so if I remember correctly, so even if he doesn't get maybe the core liberal Democrat on his side, I think that he could attract a lot of New Hampshire's independent voters. I think that they would tend to be pretty sympathetic towards him, particularly the anti-war message. I think that still plays very well in New Hampshire, despite the Massachusetts transplants. If you remember thinking back to '92, what was the old phrase? New Hampshire made Bill Clinton the comeback kid. Bill Clinton was absolutely walloped in Iowa, as, oddly enough, Joe Biden was every single time he ran for president. Joe Biden has never won Iowa. He's never come close. But Bill Clinton walloped in Iowa, and then he did pretty well in New Hampshire. I don't even think he won. I think he came in like second. But that was enough for him to start building momentum, and he went on to become the 42nd president of the United States. So I think the only thing that RFK is really missing is money. Money, money, money. But we do have a free Twitter again, and I do see RFK on... the only reason I'm thinking about it is because I'm seeing him on Twitter. So a free Twitter, while it's only one platform, it is an important platform, and I think that that could give him an opening. So, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.